Have you ever looked around and just wondered why different groups, even groups that seem to have common interests, just seem completely at odds?
Yeah, it's like they just can't find common ground, even when the facts seem clear.
Exactly. It feels like this invisible force pulling people into us versus them camps. It often seems to defy logic. It's a really powerful human thing.
It is, and what's really striking is how deep that runs. It's not just, modern politics or something superficial. It taps into something much, much older in us.
And that fundamental aspect of human nature is precisely what we want to unpack today. We're doing a deep dive into this concept of tribalism using Amy Chua's really influential book, Political Tribes, as our guide.
Right. It's a fantastic lens to look through.
Our mission here is basically to give you a shortcut to getting up to speed on this. We'll unpack Chua's main idea, look at how it messes with foreign policy sometimes, explore this pretty explosive economic idea she has, and then turn the focus onto how these dynamics are playing out right here in America.
And hopefully you'll have a few aha moments along the way. Chua's core idea, the one she really hammers home, is that we humans are, we're essentially hardwired for tribalism.
Hardwired, so not just a preference, but like built in.
Pretty much. She argues it's deep in our evolutionary programming, almost a default setting for how we see the world. And this instinct, this tribal pull, it often overrides what we think of as rational thought or even, obvious shared interests.
Okay, so that's the foundation. It kind of challenges that idea that we're all purely rational individuals, doesn't it? If we're hardwired this way, does Chua talk about why? Like, what evolutionary advantage made this stick?
Oh, absolutely. She traces it right back to basic survival. Think about our ancestors sticking together, instantly knowing who was us and who was them. That was key to survival.
Makes sense. Safety in numbers.
Exactly. And that ancient dynamic, it just pops up everywhere today, but using different labels. Race, religion, political parties, even class. You see that same us versus them structure. And what's really powerful is how it leads people to defend their own group. Almost instinctively, irrationally sometimes, even if an outsider might think, wait, that doesn't make sense for you.
So it's less about logic, more about this deep loyalty, this sense of belonging. And Chua has this quote, it really sticks with you. Humans don't just form tribes. Tribes form us.
Wow.
It flips the script, right?
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how much of my identity, my beliefs, my choices are really just shaped by the groups I belong to. That's a challenging thought.
It totally reframes things. And if you take that idea, that deep tribal wiring, it starts to explain, as Chua argues pretty convincingly, some major blind spots in how the U.S. has approached foreign policy.
Okay, how so? Where has this tribal lens been missing?
Well, she points out that America has often misunderstood conflicts around the world because we failed to see the underlying tribal dynamics. We impose our own frameworks.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Vietnam is a classic one. The U.S. framed it as this big ideological clash, democracy versus communism.
Right, that was the narrative.
But Chua argues that for the Vietnamese, it was much more about deep-seated nationalism, a kind of tribal loyalty honed over centuries of resisting outsiders. It wasn't about abstract ideology for them in the same way.
So we were speaking different languages, essentially. Ideology versus identity.
Exactly. Or think about Iraq. The U.S. went in, aiming to set up a democracy, sort of assuming a unified Iraqi identity would just emerge. But that completely underestimated the fierce existing loyalties dividing Sunnis, Shia, and Kurds. These weren't just political factions. They were tribes with deep histories, often of conflict.
Which made power sharing almost impossible, because giving power to another group felt like empowering a rival tribe, not just a political opponent.
Precisely. And you saw similar patterns in Afghanistan too, right?
Right.
Where local tribal loyalties consistently trumped any sense of national unity. America, she argues, just struggled to adapt its strategy to that reality on the ground.
It's a really critical misperception she highlights.
Yeah. Her phrasing is stark. We saw ideologies. They saw tribes. And the big takeaway from this, the lesson for foreign policy, is pretty clear, according to her.
Which is?
Foreign policy fails when we export ideology and ignore identity. You can't just drop a political system onto a place without understanding the human landscape, the tribal landscape. That's already there.
Okay, so ignoring these tribal identities can cause major problems internationally. But Chua also zeroes in on a specific kind of explosive situation where tribalism meets economics, particularly in the developing world. She calls it market-dominant minorities.
Yes, this is a really fascinating and, frankly, destabilizing concept she identifies.
So what exactly is a market-dominant minority?
She defines it as a situation you find in many developing countries where a small ethnic minority, small in numbers, controls a vastly disproportionate amount of the country's wealth and economic activity.
Okay, so a tiny group holds most of the economic power. Does she give examples?
Oh yeah, plenty. Think about the ethnic Chinese minorities in many Southeast Asian countries who often dominate commerce. Or, historically, think of white South Africans during apartheid. Or Lebanese communities in parts of West Africa. The pattern is quite common.
And the economic gap is huge, presumably.
Massive. And the critical result, the dangerous part, is that this fuels enormous resentment from the much larger majority population who often feel excluded and impoverished.
Right. You can see how that would breed anger.
And it frequently boils over into instability, ethnic tensions, sometimes even violence. This leads to her really striking formula.
Which is?
Democracy plus a market-dominant minority often equals ethnic backlash and instability.
Wow. So introducing democracy into that kind of situation can actually make things worse. It can ignite the resentment.
That's her warning. If you introduce democratic elections where the majority feels economically oppressed by a visible minority, they might use their vote not for policy, but to target that minority. It can backfire badly.
So democracy isn't always the straightforward solution. We assume it is, not without understanding these underlying tribal and economic fault lines.
Exactly. Her point is stark. Democracy, without understanding of tribal dynamics, can backfire. It's a caution against applying solutions without grasping the full human context.
These are powerful lessons for understanding global dynamics. But the really uncomfortable part, perhaps, is when Chua turns this tribal lens back onto the United States itself.
Yeah, she argues that America isn't immune. We're seeing similar tribal dynamics fracturing our own society.
How does she see that playing out here?
Well, she observes how American politics has become increasingly sorted into these rigid, often hostile tribes. She argues that the left increasingly filters politics through identity markers, race, gender, sexuality, things like that.
Okay.
And on the other side, the right has consolidated its own powerful tribal identity, especially, she notes, among white working-class Americans who feel sort of culturally and economically left behind, alienated.
And the result of these two hardening tribes
is this intense hyperpolarization we're all feeling. It stops being about disagreements over policy, taxes or healthcare details. It becomes about fundamental identity. Who are you? Which side are you on?
Which makes compromise almost impossible, right? Because you're not just disagreeing with someone's idea, you feel like they're attacking your group, your identity.
Precisely. There's a quote from her book that just cuts right to it. Each side feels not just that the other is wrong, but that the other is dangerous.
Dangerous. That really escalates things beyond normal political disagreement.
It does. And that leads to her really potent, maybe unsettling takeaway for the U.S. In America, we're not in a civil debate. We're in a tribal war. It's a call to recognize the emotional intensity, the identity stakes involved, not just pretend it's business as usual.
So, stepping back from all this, what are the ultimate stakes here if we keep ignoring this fundamental tribal aspect of human nature?
The big danger is that democracy itself relies on certain assumptions, like the idea that people vote based on rational self-interest on policies.
Mm-hmm. Right, what's best for them, economically or whatever.
But Chua's point is that often people vote based on tribal identity. Who belongs to my group? Who represents us?
Yeah.
That emotional connection can override purely rational calculations.
So if we want effective leadership, if we want to build any kind of unity, whether nationally or even just, in a company or community, we have to understand this powerful emotional tribal current.
We absolutely have to. And Chua's message, ultimately, isn't meant to be pessimistic. It's not saying we're doomed to division. It's more a call for realism, for caution.
Okay.
Recognizing our tribal instincts isn't about giving in to them or excusing division. It's actually the essential first step if we ever hope to move beyond them and find some common ground. You can't fix a problem you refuse to understand.
It's about acknowledging human nature, warts and all. So we've just covered a lot of ground here, diving into this powerful idea of tribalism. We started with how it seems baked into us, then saw how ignoring it can really complicate things like U.S. foreign policy. Mm-hmm. We unpacked that specific concept of market-dominant minorities.
And the instability that can cause.
Right. And then we brought it home, looking in the mirror at how these same tribal forces are shaping and maybe fracturing America today.
And understanding these dynamics, it's really crucial for you, the listener. Whether you're trying to make sense of the news from overseas or figure out the political divides here, or even just navigate group interactions in your own workplace or community, it gives you a different framework.
It definitely shifts your perspective on why people act the way they do, why groups clash. So as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe here's something to think about. If recognizing tribalism is the first step, like you said, toward finding unity, what's a small step or even just a shift in perspective that you could take? How could you try to bridge one of those perceived tribal divides, maybe just by trying to understand the other side's perspective a bit differently?
That's a great question to chew on. Where can you start?